morning, church.
Good morning.
It is good to be back here in person. I'm grateful for Larry Stevens preaching last week, and with only a couple of days' notice, thanks to a certain coronavirus going around, I was unable to be here. And I had just been talking with friends about how I had made it 3 whole years without getting COVID. And then a couple of days later, COVID got me. But I am back in action, masking up for a couple more days, and I have with me the gift of a shorter sermon. It is a gift for you and a gift for my recovering respiratory system. So knowing my audience, I bet most of you don't follow professional skateboarding. But if I asked you to name at least one pro skateboarder, I bet some of you could. But I bet the only one you could name is Tony Hawk. Are there even any others? I don't know. A big part of his fame is that he's had his own video game series since 1999, Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I am terrible at playing it. But I know who Tony Hawk is. And yet I could not pick him out from a crowd. It's the perfect level of fame to be a household name without being immediately recognizable. In fact, one of my favorite things about Tony Hawk is that he shared dozens and dozens of stories about people telling him that he kind of looks like Tony Hawk, especially at the airport. Stories like TSA agent staring intently. I'm trying to figure out who you look like before checking your ID. Me? Okay. That cyclist Armstrong. Nearby agent. That ain't Lance Armstrong. He's right. Oh, you look like that skateboarder. Checks ID. Same last name, too. Crazy. Crazy. TSA agent checking my ID. Hawk, like that skateboarder, Tony Hawk. I mean, exactly. Cool, I wonder what he's up to these days. This. Flight attendant checking overhead bins, sees 4 skateboards. Him, jokingly, is Tony Hawk on this flight or something? Looks down, sees me. Oh, I guess he is. Kid at skate park. Are you Tony Hawk? I am. No, you're not. Okay, I'm not. Okay, but are you for real? I am for real. I thought you'd look younger. Me too. Guy on escalator. Hey, are you Tony Hawk? Yes. You still skate? Yes, quite often. But you're not that recognizable. I'm not sure what that means, but you recognized me, and so here we are. Blank stare. Escalator ends. Guy at restaurant. Are you famous? I think that depends on who you ask. Has anybody ever told you that you look like Tom Brady? Never. Okay, that was the last one. If I were to meet Tom Brady. If I were to meet Tony Hawk or Tom Brady, whoever it might be, I probably would end up in one of his stories. I have never in my life run into a celebrity, at least not to my knowledge. I mean, maybe I have. Maybe I've met Tony Hawk and I didn't know it. I just didn't recognize them if I did. See, identifying someone is not just about putting someone's name and face together, but recognizing where their fame comes from. What have they done and what are they doing? That is their real identity. And so today we're going to be looking at a story in the Bible about people recognizing Jesus and struggling with the question of his identity. And it wasn't about what Jesus looked like, because it's not like there were photographs going around social media at the time, 2,000 years ago. People couldn't recognize him that way, but it was about who Jesus was, who he claimed to be, and who people believed that he was. What had Jesus done, and what was Jesus doing? We're going to be looking at a story about this in Matthew chapter 16. We are continuing a long series of lessons that we started back in September called The Story, which is guiding us from Genesis to Revelation. Now, this is a 31-week survey, which is giving us a broad, general overview of the story that God has been telling and which is continuing to unfold. But there is so much, much more that can be said, especially about the stories of Jesus. This time last year, if you recall, we spent 16 weeks on the Gospel of Mark alone. Now, we're only spending a couple of weeks on Jesus' ministry this year. But Jesus has been present this entire time. This entire story, Jesus has been there because Jesus wasn't an ordinary man. He was the Son of the living God. This is the story of the Messiah. Beginning in verse 13 of Matthew 16, we read this. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "What about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Peter got it right. He didn't always get it right, but this time he did. And for Peter, it was pretty clear. He had seen the signs. He had witnessed the healings. He had heard the sermons. He had shared the bread. He had felt the hand reaching out and catching him as he sank into the waters that he couldn't walk on. Peter had learned a lot about Jesus in the short time he had spent with him. And so when Jesus asked him that question, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter knew the answer. "You are the Messiah. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, Peter wasn't a star student. He wasn't a genius like Sherlock Holmes answering with the power of deductive reasoning. In fact, Jesus immediately responded saying that Peter didn't figure it out at all. The answer was given to Peter by God, and Peter was blessed because of it. Last spring, we noted that this story was at the exact center of Mark's gospel and serves as a critical narrative hinge, a turning point in that story as events then begin to lead to the end. Now, in Matthew's gospel, which we just read from, it isn't as central, but it is still remains very important in the story that Matthew is telling, because Matthew is all about Jesus' identity, which is why he began with a genealogy. The whole gospel story is about that question, who is Jesus? But the answer isn't just biographical in nature, but theological. Jesus isn't just the Messiah, the anointed one, the descendant of King David, and so many other important figures in the story so far. Jesus is the Son of the living God. He is God in human form. Now, comparing Mark and Matthew's, both accounts are very similar. But one notable difference, though, is that Mark's gospel is his account of the story. It is set on the way to Caesarea Philippi, whereas in Matthew's gospel, Jesus doesn't ask the question until they're already there. And that shifts the focus from the journey to the place. So the question then is, what is so significant about Caesarea Philippi? Well, don't confuse it with the city of Philippi, which the book of Philippians was written to, because that was in Greece. Caesarea Philippi was a town in Judea about 25 to 30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. It was named after both Caesar Augustus and one of King Herod's sons, Philip, who used it as an administrative center of government. The local Roman military was based there in Caesarea Philippi, and so political power and authority were on display, as well as economic power, since this was on a very important trade route. But just outside the city's walls, there was a religious power present as well, particularly at a cave that housed a natural spring, which was one of the sources of the Jordan River. You can still visit this cave today. In ancient times, the cave had been associated with the Canaanite god Baal, but when the Greeks and Romans took over, they brought their own gods in. And at the cave in the spring, they built a temple to the god Pan. You know, the half-goat guy that plays the flute. Now, he may seem silly now, but we get the word panic from him because it was said that in battles, he could instill panic among the enemy. This cave was also associated with the underworld, which was ruled by the god Hades. Are you seeing a connection here? So there in Caesarea Philippi, a place where the world's power and might was on display, Jesus asked his disciples who the people of the world said that he was and who they thought he was. Now, this wasn't a question of identity, but allegiance. It wasn't about Peter correctly identifying him, but Peter's confession is a statement of faith in the living God. Literally, Simon Peter says that Jesus is the God that lives. And the living God revealed his identity to Peter, and the living God declared that in this confession of faith was great power. Not the power of the kingdoms of this world or of its gods, but the power of the kingdom of heaven. And upon that rock, the church is built and cannot be overcome, not even by Hades and death itself, for death has no power over the living God. And that is a glorious truth that we will be celebrating in 2 weeks on Easter Sunday. It is the rock that Jesus spoke of upon which the church is built. We are assembled upon the identity of Jesus the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And to those of us gathered upon the rock of Christ the living God, we are given power and authority of heaven, just as Peter and the apostles were, for the Spirit of Christ is upon us. Jesus told his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So how then would the world know? The answer is alive. The identity of Jesus speaks louder than words, for it is rooted in what God has done and what God is doing. God is at work in God's people in a way that powerfully declares that our God is alive. When we live like Jesus, the Son of the living God, we declare that our God is alive. When we demonstrate love for one another, even for those whom the world deems unworthy of love, and when we include those who don't even love us back, like our enemies, and when we demonstrate forgiveness just like Jesus, the Son of the living God, and when we love like Jesus, we declare that God is alive. When we act with justice and mercy and peace, and when we instill hope for the hopeless, and when we bring good news to the poor and the oppressed, just as Jesus, the Son of the living God, proclaimed, then we declare that our God is alive. The life that we live together points this world to the power of the kingdom of heaven, which cannot be overcome. And we point to the living God that is in our midst, dwelling among us. For this is the gospel we are preaching, and the good news we are proclaiming, not just with our words, but with our lives. May the world know the Messiah. May they see his life, see that he is alive. And if you are here and you want to know more about the Jesus that we worship, and the life that he lived, and the life that he is still living, we would love to tell you more about what he has done, what he is doing, and what he will do. You can be a part of it. The keys to the kingdom of heaven are available to anyone and everyone. And if you are here and if you are struggling through this present life, know that you are not alone. If you are in need of prayer and encouragement, and if God, the living God, can minister to you through us, let us know. And in all things, may God and God alone receive all glory and honor and praise. Amen.